Good morning, friends on YouTube and Zoom. We'll begin in just a moment. Good morning and welcome to our daily devotional from Pilgrim Congregational Church. I'm Patrick Horn, and I have not been in a fight. I had to have a little bit of basal carcinoma removed from below my eye, and the doctors did a great job. However, this might be as good as it looks all week. They tell me that it will look worse and worse as the week goes on. So I thought, but they said I didn't need a bandage as long as it wasn't bleeding. And I think actually, given the fact that they took a big chunk out of my face, that it actually looks pretty good. So I'm grateful to the doctors and their work. And I'm feeling well. It's not hurting me at all. So don't worry, I'll be fine. And my gratitude to the doctors there in Glendora. So our passage this week is Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8, and this is the account of the resurrection given in the Gospel of Mark. And Mark, as you know, is slightly different than the other Gospels when it comes to the resurrection story and the end of the gospel, because it ends abruptly in the earliest manuscripts. And we know for a fact that there are two different endings here, a shorter ending, and then which comes right after verse 8, and then a longer ending, which is verses 9 through the end of the chapter, verse 20. And that passage we know for a fact was added later. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not important or that even it shouldn't be included. Most translations do include that passage because of its importance through the history of the church. It was added fairly soon after, probably 3rd century or so. And so it's not really should not be a source of concern at all. But there is something very powerful about these 8 verses on their own in Mark chapter 16. That is these first 8 verses and how this passage ends. And I would like for us to focus on the first 4 verses this morning and try as best we can to situate ourselves in the position of the women who are coming to the tomb: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, and try to see things from their perspective. We know too that in just the previous verses in Mark chapter 15, that Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where the body was laid, and they were there when the stone was rolled against the door of the tomb. So according to Mark, these women are quite aware of the situation. They know, of course, that he was anointed by Mary Magdalene with the expensive perfume, but he was not. There weren't any anointing oils or perfumes provided at the time, apparently, that he was laid in the tomb. So the Marys are coming back now in chapter 16 to do that. So let's try to read these first 4 verses from their perspective. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. So we actually learned quite a bit from these first 4 verses. And there are some really important messages in the gospel right here in these verses. The first, I think, is the great reminder of how radical the gospel was in many respects, to put this much emphasis on the role of women in the central event of Christianity, that is the death and the resurrection of Jesus, where the women play such a huge role. I know that doesn't come as a surprise to most of us. I know in the Baptist churches that I grew up in, the women basically ran the church. They taught the Sunday school and cooked all the dinners and made sure everybody was in the right places. The deacons, of course, were all thought to be important by everyone, but we all knew the truth, I think, that the women were doing all the work in the church. And so this is not a huge surprise to us. We know how in many cultures, women frequently do lots of the work without getting a lot of the attention. And what is unusual about the Gospels is that the women are not always in the background. They're often brought to the front, and that is extremely important. And that's exactly what's happened here. The very first verse and the very central part of the central element of the gospel story. You have these women coming to the tomb to anoint Jesus. They saw that he was wrapped but had not been anointed, and they also saw that the huge stone had been rolled in front of the tomb, so that they got their spices and ready to go to the tomb as the sun was rising. And they were already concerned about how they were going to do this, because they knew that the stone would probably was going to be too heavy for them to roll away themselves. So they knew that they were going to need some help moving the stone. And then they got there and the stone was already rolled away. So one of the other big things that this tells us, of course, has to do with the expectations of this event. The Gospel of Mark, is particularly, and the Gospel of John, both of them talk a good bit about things that are hidden, or things that should be quiet about, that shouldn't talk about, or things that people don't understand. And it's extraordinary that there were, of course, all of these references that Jesus made to his own death and the fact that he was going to rise again in 3 days. And the Gospels don't hide the fact that Jesus did this, and the disciples and other followers had no idea what he was talking about. You can see from the women going to the tomb, they don't have the least expectation that Jesus will have risen and will be gone. They don't have the least expectation of that. They've purchased spices. They're fully expecting to find his body laying there in the tomb, and they will anoint his body with these. So their expectations do not match up with what the gospel has been telling us all along. The gospel story has been telling us all along, and that he's not going to be there. Now, it's fascinating, and powerful, I think, that it plays out like this, because I think that I think we would have been just like these women. I know I would have been. I would not have. I certainly wouldn't expect the body to be gone. That just would not have entered my mind at all, and clearly it didn't theirs either. And there's a powerful message here because it has to do with our expectations and the role of the gospel in our lives. Someone said to me this week, preacher, you do a good job with these Bible stories, but we hear them all the time, and there's a sense in which they kind of lose their attraction because we know the story, we hear it all the time. And I said, yeah, I understand that. I said, but it's not really about the Bible stories are not really about being entertained or being, something surprising in the story. Certainly because we already know the story. The lesson here is that the power of the resurrection is surprising in our lives. That is, that it shatters expectations in our lives. And it shatters these expectations by virtue of turning upside down what we expect. I mean, it's so natural for us, for example, to walk into a room and notice who's dressed nicely and who isn't, or who looks in very strong health and who looks weak, and we notice the children and all. And the Gospels shatter those expectations, and hearing these stories, and in the Holy Week, replaying the Passion each year is so important, because it reminds us that this is what the gospel does in our lives, that it turns our lives upside down, shatters our expectations, and makes us look at the world and ourselves and our relationship to the world in ways that we had not done before. So try to put yourself in the place of the women. We have expectations, and the power of the resurrection will shatter those. Let's close with this word of prayer from W.E. Orchard. O Lord, most high and wonderful, to whose mind the past and the future meet in our eternal now, to whose sight all things lie naked and open, we are the creatures of shifting time, to whom the past is soon forgotten and from whom the future is completely veiled. Our day is but a gleam of light between two nights of dark. The mists hang about our minds, our feet are fettered, we are bruised and bound, robbed and cheated every day. Yet we can conceive a higher knowledge beside, which ours is poor and incomplete. Though our ignorance is well nigh universal, at least we know we do not know. Our night is never so long or so dark that we forget what the day is like. We are more than we seem, and thou art nearer than we dream. Yet we only dare to ask for light upon one step ahead, faith to take one day at a time, endurance to wait for the dawn. Forgive the crushing care that comes from our lack of vision, our fears that the truth will never be clear, our frenzied, ineffectual strivings. Let us feel through all that thou dost lead us on. Forgive the impertinence that would hurry on the dawn, that would thrust impious hands across the pattern thou art weaving, that would outrun thy perfect will for us. May we become heirs to the Spirit of Jesus, calm because there are 12 hours in the day, confident that the truth shall yet be proclaimed from the housetops, courageous enough to endure the cross, despise the shame, and in death to commit ourselves into thy hands. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.